The four-star general's hand trembled as he raised it to his temple, delivering a crisp salute to the dusty woman fixing her van. "Phantom Unit 7, he whispered, his voice breaking. "My God, you're alive." The MPs who'd nearly arrested her moments before stood frozen, watching their commanding officer honor someone they'd mistaken for a vagrant. This is the story of how a simple tattoo exposed America's most classified military secret and the woman who'd been erased from history for 50 years. Stay with me until the end and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this incredible story has traveled. The Georgia sun bore down mercilessly on Interstate 185 just outside Fort Benning's main gate. Heat waves shimmered off the asphalt, creating mirages that danced and twisted in the afternoon glare. Evelyn Carter wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of motor oil across her weathered face. At 62, she moved with the careful precision of someone who'd learned that every motion counted, every action had consequences. Her 1985 Chevrolet van military surplus, painted civilian blue, but still bearing the ghost outlines of its former olive drab, had chosen the worst possible place to die. The engine had seized with a grinding metallic scream that she recognized all too well. 20 feet from the base's security checkpoint, close enough that the young guards were watching her with that particular brand of suspicion reserved for civilians who ventured too near military installations. "Come on, old girl," Evelyn muttered to the van, her voice rough from years of cigarettes she'd quit too late. "Not here. Anywhere but here." She'd avoided military bases for decades, taking long detours around them whenever possible. The sight of those gates, the guards, the crisp uniforms, they all stirred memories she'd spent half a lifetime trying to bury. But today, returning from her sister's funeral in Columbus, the most direct route had led her past Fort Benning. She'd thought she could handle it. Just drive past, eyes forward, don't look at the base where she'd once trained recruits in skills that didn't officially exist. The van had other plans. Evelyn popped the hood, and a cloud of steam hissed out, carrying the acrid smell of burnt coolant. She stepped back, coughing, and caught sight of 3 military police officers approaching from the checkpoint. Young kids, really. Probably hadn't even been born when she'd last worn a uniform. "Ma'am, you need to move this vehicle," the lead MP called out. His name tape read Daniels, and he couldn't have been more than 25. Clean-shaven, sharp-eyed, with that particular swagger that came from a few years of authority, but not enough experience to temper it with wisdom. "Working on it, specialist," Evelyn replied, not looking up from the engine. She'd already identified the problem, a blown head gasket, probably worse. This van wasn't going anywhere under its own power. "How'd you know my rank?" Daniels asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. Evelyn cursed herself silently. After all these years, she still couldn't help but read rank insignia like others read street signs. "Lucky guess," she said, grabbing her toolbox from the van's interior. The second MP, a female corporal named Rodriguez, according to her uniform, circled around the van, peering through the windows. "Lot of camping gear in here, ma'am. You living in this vehicle? Road trip," Evelyn said curtly. "Family business." The third MP, barely out of basic training by the look of him, stayed back by their Humvee, hand resting on his sidearm. They were treating her like a potential threat, which might have been amusing if it wasn't so irritating. If they only knew the things she'd done to protect people like them, the enemies she'd eliminated before they even knew such enemies existed. "You have any identification?" Daniels pressed. Evelyn straightened, feeling her back protest. Too many years, too many injuries that hadn't healed quite right. She reached into her back pocket, pulled out her wallet, and handed over her driver's license. Daniels examined it with unnecessary thoroughness. "Virginia license, but the address. This is a P.O. box," he noted. "That's not illegal," Evelyn said, trying to keep the edge out of her voice. No, ma'am, but it's unusual. You said family business. You have family at Fort Benning. No. Then why are you here? I'm not here, specialist. I'm broken down on a public road that happens to run past your gate. There's a difference. Rodriguez had completed her circuit of the van and whispered something to Daniels. His expression hardened. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step away from the vehicle. Excuse me. Step away from the vehicle, please. Keep your hands where we can see them. Evelyn felt her muscles tense involuntarily, years of training threatening to override her common sense. These kids had no idea who they were pushing. She could disarm all three of them before they knew what was happening, even at her age. Muscle memory didn't fade, not the kind that had been beaten into her through years of the most intensive training the military had never officially conducted. I'm a 62-year-old woman with a broken-down van, she said slowly. What exactly do you think I'm going to do? Ma'am, compliance would be appreciated, Daniels said, his hand moving to rest on his own sidearm. The young private had stepped forward now, trying to look intimidating. Evelyn almost felt sorry for him. She'd trained boys like him once, turned them from soft recruits into weapons. Some of them had even survived their first missions. Fine, she said, stepping back from the van, hands slightly raised. But this is ridiculous. Corporal Rodriguez noticed some interesting items in your vehicle, Daniels explained. Military-grade equipment. Care to explain? Surplus stores sell that stuff to anyone, Evelyn said. It's not illegal to own military camping gear. No, but combined with your evasive answers and proximity to a military installation. He let the implication hang. You think I'm what exactly? A terrorist, a spy? Evelyn couldn't keep the bitter amusement out of her voice. With a broken-down van in broad daylight. Procedure is procedure, ma'am. We're going to need to search your vehicle. You need probable cause for that, specialist. Suspicious behavior near a military installation provides that, ma'am. Post 9/11 protocols. Evelyn sighed. She could fight this, probably win, but it would mean lawyers' attention records. Everything she'd spent decades avoiding. Fine. Search it. As Rodriguez began going through the van, Evelyn stood in the blazing sun, feeling the heat radiate off the pavement through her worn boots. She'd bought them at a truck stop in Kentucky, deliberately choosing the cheapest pair to avoid anything that might remind her of military-issue footwear. But standing at attention, or something close to it, came naturally even after all these years. Ma'am, Rodriguez called from the van. I'm going to need you to explain this. She held up a knife, its blade long and wickedly sharp, with a handle wrapped in paracord. Evelyn recognized it immediately, her old combat knife, one of the few things she'd kept from her service. She'd forgotten it was even in the van, tucked away in a compartment she rarely opened. It's a knife, Evelyn said flatly. It's a military combat knife. K-bar. Modified grip. This isn't something you buy at a surplus store. So I modified a knife. Also not illegal. Daniels stepped closer. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you directly. Are you former military? The question hung in the air, like the heat shimmer off the road. Such a simple question. Such a complicated answer. Officially, Evelyn Carter had never served in the military. Her records didn't exist. Her unit had never existed. The missions she'd completed and the people she'd saved, the enemies she'd eliminated, none of it had ever happened according to any database these MPs could access. No, she lied. You sure about that? Because you stand like military. You knew my rank without looking close. You've got military gear, military bearing. I said no. Rodriguez pulled something else from the van. Then how do you explain this? It was a photograph, old and faded, showing a younger Evelyn in unmarked combat fatigues, standing with a group of similarly dressed soldiers. No unit patches, no rank insignia, nothing that would identify them. But to anyone with military experience, it was obviously a military photo. "Old friends," Evelyn said. "Private military contractors. We did security work overseas in the 80s. We're overseas, various places. That's not an answer. It's all the answer you're getting without a warrant." The situation was escalating. Evelyn could see it in the way the MPs were positioning themselves, the way their hands hovered near their weapons. They were young, nervous, and had been trained to see threats everywhere. She was checking too many boxes on their suspicious persons checklist. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to turn around and place your hands on the vehicle," Daniels said. "You're arresting me for what?" "Detained for questioning. Turn around, please." This was it. The moment where she had to decide. Submit to their authority, risk her carefully constructed anonymity being shattered when they ran her fingerprints and found, what? She wasn't even sure anymore what traces of her existence might still lurk in some classified database. Or resist and definitely blow her cover. She turned around slowly, placing her hands on the sun-scorched metal of the van. The heat burned her palms, but she didn't flinch. Rodriguez approached with handcuffs. "Is that really necessary?" Evelyn asked. "Standard procedure, ma'am." The metal clicked around her wrists, and Evelyn felt a surge of something she hadn't experienced in years. Not fear, she'd moved beyond fear long ago. It was rage. Pure volcanic rage at the indignity of it. She'd given everything to her country. Her youth, her identity, her entire existence had been sacrificed on the altar of national security. She'd done things that would give these children nightmares, all so they could stand here in their crisp uniforms, playing soldier, without ever knowing what real darkness looked like. "This is a mistake," she said quietly. "We'll sort it out at the station," Daniels replied, guiding her toward their Humvee. As they walked, Evelyn's sleeve rode up slightly, revealing part of a tattoo on her forearm. Rodriguez noticed it first. "That's an interesting tattoo, ma'am." Evelyn said nothing. The tattoo was her one act of rebellion, the one mark she'd allowed herself after the unit was disbanded. It was abstract enough that civilians would see only an artistic design. But anyone who'd been involved in certain classified operations would recognize it immediately, a phoenix rising from water, 7 stars forming a crown above its head. Phantom Unit 7's unofficial emblem. "I've never seen anything like it," Rodriguez continued. "Military? No." They were almost to the Humvee when another vehicle approached from inside the base, a black SUV with government plates. It stopped near the checkpoint, and a man in Army combat uniform stepped out. Even from a distance, Evelyn could see the 4 stars on his chest. "Shit," Daniels muttered. "That's General Thomas." General Marcus Thomas. Evelyn knew the name had followed his career from a distance. He'd been a colonel when she was active working in military intelligence. Their paths had crossed exactly once in a briefing room in Panama where things that didn't happen were discussed by people who didn't exist. The general approached with the measured stride of someone used to being watched. His aide, a major, struggled to keep up. As he got closer, Evelyn could see the years had been relatively kind to him. His hair was silver now, his face lined but still sharp. His eyes, those remained the same. Intelligent, calculating, always processing information. "Specialist Daniels," the general said, his voice carrying the authority of decades of command. "What's the situation here?" "Sir," Daniels snapped to attention. "Suspicious person near the installation. We're detaining her for questioning." Thomas's gaze shifted to Evelyn, and she saw the exact moment recognition flickered across his features. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly, then narrowed as he took in her appearance, the aged face, the civilian clothes, the handcuffs. I see, he said slowly. And what makes this person suspicious? Military equipment in her vehicle, sir. Evasive answers. Suspicious behavior. Military equipment. A combat knife, sir. Modified. And some other gear. Thomas stepped closer to Evelyn. Ma'am, do I know you? I don't think so, Evelyn replied, meeting his gaze steadily. You look familiar. He was studying her face now, and she could see him working through memories, trying to place her. His eyes dropped to her exposed forearm, to the tattoo that Rodriguez had noticed. The change in his expression was dramatic. The color drained from his face and his lips parted slightly. For a moment he looked like he'd seen a ghost, which in a way he had. Specialist, he said, his voice oddly strained. Remove those handcuffs, now. Sir, that's an order, Specialist. Remove them immediately. Confused, Daniels fumbled for his keys and unlocked the handcuffs. Evelyn rubbed her wrists, saying nothing. Thomas stepped back and did something that made every MP present freeze in absolute shock. The four-star general commander of Fort Benning, hero of Iraq and Afghanistan, snapped to attention and rendered a perfect salute. Phantom Unit 7, he said, his voice carrying across the checkpoint. My God, you're alive. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the cicadas seemed to pause their endless chirping. Daniels stood with his mouth slightly open, keys still in his hand. Rodriguez had gone pale. The young private looked like he might faint. Evelyn didn't return the salute. She couldn't. Officially, she'd never held rank. Officially, she'd never served. But the gesture itself, the recognition from someone who knew what those words meant, it was almost too much. General, she said quietly, you're making a mistake. No, Thomas replied, lowering his salute but remaining at attention. The mistake was forgetting. The mistake was pretending you never existed. He turned to the MPs. This woman, do you have any idea who you just put in handcuffs? Sir, she said she wasn't military, because she can't say otherwise. Thomas's voice cracked like a whip. Her service is so classified that acknowledging it could have put her in federal prison. Still could. He turned back to Evelyn. Colonel, don't, Evelyn interrupted. That rank died with the unit. You earned that rank. You earned more than that. I earned a grave with no marker and a family that thinks I spent 10 years as a traveling photographer. Thomas's aide, Major Peterson, according to his name tape, cleared his throat. Sir, perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. The general looked around, seeming to remember they were standing on a public road with several very confused MPs watching. Yes. Ma'am Evelyn, would you come to my office, please? My van. We'll have it towed to the motor pool, get it fixed. No charge. It's the least. He stopped, swallowing hard. It's the very least we can do. I don't want charity. It's not charity, it's... God, I don't even know what to call it. Restitution, recognition, an apology 50 years too late. Evelyn looked at the van, then at the base beyond the checkpoint. She'd spent so long avoiding places like this, avoiding anyone who might know who she used to be. But standing here with Thomas, looking at her like she was some kind of hero instead of a forgotten ghost, she felt something crack inside her chest. 1 hour, she said. I'll give you 1 hour. Thank you. Thomas turned to the MPs. Specialist Daniels, you and your team will speak of this to no one. What you've witnessed here is classified at the highest levels. Am I understood? Yes, sir. Good. And Specialist, in the future, when you encounter someone who seems to know a little too much about military protocol, consider that there might be reasons for that knowledge that you're not cleared to understand. As they walked toward the general's SUV, Evelyn caught Rodriguez staring at her tattoo again. The young corporal had the look of someone trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. "Ma'am," Rodriguez called out. Who are you?" Evelyn paused, looking back. For 50 years, she'd had no answer to that question. She'd been nobody, a ghost, a woman who'd never existed, doing things that never happened. But now, with Thomas's recognition hanging in the air, like a benediction, she found herself speaking the truth for the first time in decades. "I'm someone who kept you safe before you were born," she said. "Someone who made sure the monsters stayed in the shadows where they belong." The ride to Thomas's office was silent, except for the hum of the SUV's air conditioning. Evelyn sat in the back with the general while Major Peterson drove. She could feel Thomas stealing glances at her, as if afraid she might disappear if he looked away too long. Fort Benning hadn't changed much. The buildings were newer, some of the training fields had been modernized, but the bones of the place remained the same. She'd run these roads at dawn carrying full packs and singing cadences that didn't officially exist. She'd learned to kill in a dozen different ways in buildings that looked just like these taught by instructors whose names had been redacted from all records. The general's office was in the headquarters building, a sprawling complex that managed to look both imposing and mundane. They took a back entrance, avoiding most of the staff, though Evelyn noticed several curious glances from those they did pass. A 4-star general personally escorting a civilian woman in oil-stained clothes was not a common sight. The office itself was what she'd expected: wood paneling, flags, photos of Thomas with various dignitaries and presidents. What she hadn't expected was the locked cabinet in the corner, or the way Thomas went to it, immediately producing a key from around his neck. "I'm not supposed to have this," he said, opening the cabinet. "Any of it. It was all supposed to be destroyed in '75 when the unit was disbanded. But some of us, we couldn't let it all disappear." Inside the cabinet were files, photographs, and items that made Evelyn's breath catch. A unit patch that had never been official. A challenge coin that shouldn't exist. And photos, dozens of photos of young men and women in unmarked uniforms, training, laughing, being human in between becoming weapons. "Jesus, Marcus," she breathed, forgetting formality. "You could go to prison for this." "Some things are worth the risk." He pulled out a file, thick and worn. "Do you know how many of you are still alive?" "No, we weren't allowed to stay in contact." 3. Out of 37 original members, 3 are confirmed still alive. You, Rodriguez, not the MP, different Rodriguez and Chen. Though Chen's in a nursing home in Seattle, dementia. Doesn't remember any of it. Maybe that's a blessing. Thomas set the file on his desk, opening it to reveal mission reports, all heavily redacted but still readable enough to bring back memories Evelyn had tried to bury. Nicaragua, Cambodia, East Berlin. Places American soldiers had never officially been doing things that had never officially happened. "You saved my life once," Thomas said quietly. "Panama, 1974. You probably don't remember. The warehouse district. 3 hostiles. You were meeting an asset who'd been turned." His eyes widened. "You remember?" "I remember everything. It's a curse, not a gift. Your team extracted me before the ambush. I never got to thank you. You weren't supposed to know we were there. But I did. I saw you just for a second. You were covering our exit from a rooftop. I was a young intelligence officer who thought he knew everything about the shadow world. Then I saw you saw that tattoo when you rolled up your sleeve to take a shot, and realized there were levels to this game I hadn't even imagined." Evelyn moved to the window, looking out at the parade ground where soldiers were conducting evening PT. So young, all of them. So unaware of the things that happened in the dark to keep them safe. "Why did you really stop me, Marcus? It wasn't just recognition." No, he admitted. It's because I've been trying to find you. All of you. For the last 5 years. Why, Tos? Because the country is finally ready to acknowledge what you did. Not publicly, never publicly, but there's a movement within the Pentagon. Recognition. Benefits. A proper burial when the time comes, not some unmarked grave in a field somewhere. We knew what we signed up for. No, you didn't. You signed up to serve your country. You didn't sign up to be erased from existence, to have your families told you were dead while you were still operating, to come home to nothing but a new identity and a warning never to speak of what you'd done. Evelyn turned from the window. It's been 50 years, Marcus. 50 years of being nobody. You can't just, yes, we can. We have to. Do you know what happened to Martinez? She shook her head. Martinez had been her second in command, a brilliant operator who could speak 7 languages and kill a man with a paperclip. Died homeless in Chicago, 2003. Buried in a potter's field. No one knew who he was until we found him through fingerprints last year. A hero, a man who'd saved hundreds of American lives, died alone under a bridge because he couldn't tell anyone who he was, couldn't get proper VA benefits, couldn't do anything but drink to forget. The rage was back burning in her chest. Not for herself, but for Martinez, for all of them who'd been thrown away like used equipment. What exactly are you proposing? She asked. Full recognition within the classified community. Pension backdated to when you should have retired. Medical benefits. And when you die, a star on the wall at Langley, even if we can't put your name under it. I wasn't CIA. You weren't anything officially, but the CIA has claimed jurisdiction over Phantom Unit 7's legacy. They want to honor you, all of you, the only way they can. There was a knock at the door, and Peterson entered. Sir, there's a situation. Not now, Major. Sir, it's about the MPs at the gate. Specialist Daniels did some research on that tattoo. He's asking questions. Thomas's face darkened. I told him. He's young and curious, sir. He looked up the symbol, found some conspiracy theory websites that mentioned something called Phantom Unit 7. He's not breaking orders technically, just investigating. Evelyn laughed, surprising herself with the sound. Let him search. He'll find nothing but ghost stories and half-truths. We made sure of that. Flooded the zone with misinformation before the internet even existed. You did that. Standard procedure. If you can't hide something, completely bury it in lies. Make the truth sound so outrageous that no one would believe it even if they heard it. Thomas dismissed Peterson and poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a bottle he kept in his desk. So what now? Will you let us help you? I don't need help. Your van breaks down outside a military base you've been avoiding for decades, and you don't think you need help. That was coincidence. Was it? Or was it 50 years of running finally catching up to you? He pushed the glass toward her. You've been alone long enough, Evelyn. Let us bring you in from the cold. The whiskey burned, but it was a good burn, familiar. How many operations had ended with a glass like this shared with people who couldn't officially exist? What would it involve? She asked. Paperwork, interviews, recording your history for classified archives, making sure that somewhere, even if it's in a vault 100 feet underground, the truth about what you did exists. And if I say no, then we fix your van and you drive away and we pretend this never happened. But Evelyn... He pulled out another photo from the file, this one showing the full unit at some unidentified base. Young faces, determined and proud. Don't they deserve to be remembered? Even if it's classified. Even if the public never knows. Don't they deserve to have their stories told? She looked at the photo, finding her younger self in the back row. God, she'd been so young, so certain, that what they were doing mattered. The woman in the photo had no idea she'd spend the next 50 years as a ghost, that she'd outlive almost everyone in that image, that she'd end up fixing her van on the side of the road, with nothing but memories and a tattoo to prove she'd ever existed. "Tell me about the others," she said. "The ones who died." For the next hour, Thomas went through the files. Each name, each face, each story of what had happened after the unit was disbanded. Some had adapted, finding new lives in the civilian world. Most hadn't. The suicide rate was astronomical, the addiction rate worse. They'd been trained to be weapons, then told to be normal, with no support, no acknowledgement, no way to process what they'd done and seen. Thompson made it until 1998. Thomas read from one file. Married 2 kids, never told his family anything. Left a note saying he was sorry for the things he couldn't talk about. Walsh died in a bar fight in 1982. Took out 4 men before the 5th got him with a knife. Police never figured out how one man had done that much damage. Reeves became a mercenary. Died in Africa 1989. At least he died doing what he knew. Each name was a weight, a ghost adding to the collection she carried. By the time Thomas finished, the sun was setting, painting his office in shades of gold and red. "I need time to think," Evelyn said finally. "Of course, take all the time you need. Here." He handed her a card. "My personal number. When you're ready, if you're ready, call me." She stood to leave, then paused. "The MPs, Daniels especially, don't punish them. They were doing their job. They put you in handcuffs. They didn't know. That's the point, isn't it? We did our job so well that even our own people don't know we existed." As she reached the door, Thomas called out, "Evelyn, where will you go?" She thought about it. For 50 years, she'd been running without really knowing what she was running from. Maybe it was time to stop. "I don't know," she admitted. "For the first time in 50 years, I really don't know." The motor pool had fixed her van, more than fixed it, really. They'd practically rebuilt the engine, changed all the fluids, replaced the tires. It ran better than it had in years. She found Specialist Daniels waiting by it, looking uncomfortable. "Ma'am," he said, "I wanted to apologize. For doing your job. I looked you up, after the general saluted you. I know I wasn't supposed to, but..." "And what did you find?" "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Which tells me everything." He shifted his weight. "My grandfather was in Vietnam. He used to talk about the ghost soldiers who'd show up, do impossible things, then disappear. No unit patches, no names, just results. Were you one of them? Your grandfather had an active imagination. Maybe. Or maybe some of us owe you more than we'll ever know." She climbed into the van, started the engine. It purred like a content cat. "Take care, Specialist. And next time you see someone who knows a little too much about military life, maybe just let them be." "Yes, ma'am." As she drove away from Fort Benning, Evelyn found herself thinking about the photo in Thomas's office, all those young faces frozen in time. They'd called themselves phantoms as a joke at first, because they haunted the enemy's nightmares. They hadn't known they'd become phantoms for real haunting, only themselves and each other's memories. Her phone, a burner she replaced every few months, rang. Only 3 people had this number, and 2 of them were dead. She pulled over, answered. "Carter." "Evelyn." The voice was old, cracked, but familiar. "It's Rodriguez, Miguel Rodriguez." Her heart stopped. "Miguel, how did you—" "General Thomas. He called me after you left his office. Said he'd found you. Said you were alive." "Where are you?" "New Mexico. Running a garage, if you can believe it. fixing cars for people who have no idea their mechanic once helped overthrow a government. She laughed, actually laughed. I'm fixing cars too. Well, trying to. Mine just broke down. 50 years, Evelyn. 50 years of silence, and now, did Thomas tell you what they're offering? Recognition of a sort. It's not about the recognition. It's about finally being able to tell someone, anyone, to have it written down somewhere that we existed, that what we did mattered. Did it matter? You saved 37 Americans in Nicaragua. I was there. Remember that convoy that was about to be ambushed? Those soldiers went home to their families because of what you did. They had children, grandchildren, lives. Because of you. Because of us. The Phantom Unit 7. He said it like a prayer. You know I got the tattoo as well. Same place, same design. My wife thinks it's some weird military thing from my youth. She has no idea. Thomas has it too. Not the tattoo, but the memory. He says there are others people who remember who want to make it right. Can they make it right? She thought about Martinez dying under a bridge, Thompson, leaving that note all the others who'd been crushed under the weight of carrying secrets too heavy for one person to bear alone. No, she said, but maybe they can make it better. For whoever's left. All three of us, Miguel said with bitter humor. Chen doesn't even remember his own name most days. It's just you and me, Evelyn, the last of the ghosts. Then maybe it's time we stopped being ghosts. There was silence on the line, then a sound that might have been crying or laughing. She couldn't tell which. You'll do it, Miguel asked. Talk to them. I'll think about it. That's more than I hoped for. Evelyn, could I see you? It's been so long and I need to know I didn't imagine it all. That we were real. We were real, Miguel. But were we? Sometimes I look at that tattoo and think maybe I just dreamed it all. Maybe I've always been a mechanic in New Mexico. Maybe the nightmares are just nightmares, not memories. She understood. God, how she understood. The line between memory and nightmare had blurred so many times over the years. Give me a few days, she said. I'll come to New Mexico. Really, really, we'll drink cheap beer and tell lies about the things that never happened. And maybe some truths. Maybe, if we remember what those are. After she hung up, Evelyn sat in the van for a long time watching the sun disappear completely. The highway stretched out before her, leading everywhere and nowhere. For 50 years, she'd been driving roads like this, never stopping long enough to let the past catch up. But the past had found her anyway, in the form of a broken-down van and a general who remembered. In the form of young MPs who didn't know they were arresting a ghost. In the form of a tattoo that marked her as surely as any scarlet letter. She pulled out Thomas's card, turned it over in her fingers. One phone call and she could stop running. One phone call and the phantom could become real again. One phone call and maybe, just maybe, the sacrifices would mean something. Not yet. But soon. She started driving, but for the first time in decades, she wasn't running from something. She was driving towards something even if she wasn't quite sure what it was yet. The van hummed smoothly beneath her, fixed by hands that didn't know they were repairing a piece of history. In her rearview mirror, Fort Benning disappeared into the darkness, but she knew she'd be back. The general would wait. The files would wait. The chance for recognition, however classified, would wait. Because Evelyn Carter, who had been nobody for 50 years, was finally ready to be somebody again. Even if that somebody existed only in classified files and the memories of those who knew what to look for. The tattoo on her arm seemed to burn in the darkness. Phoenix rising from water. 7 stars for 7 teams that had once been the most elite unit America had never acknowledged. She'd gotten it as an act of defiance, a permanent mark, that she'd existed even if the record said otherwise. Now it had become something else. A key. A recognition code. A way home. Somewhere in New Mexico, Miguel Rodriguez was probably looking at his matching tattoo, remembering the same ghosts carrying the same weight. Somewhere in Seattle, Chen was lost in dementia, perhaps the luckiest of them all. And somewhere in unmarked graves across the country, the rest of Unit 7 lay forgotten by everyone except the few who knew to remember. But not for much longer. The road stretched on, and Evelyn Carter drove through the night, no longer a phantom, but not quite real either. Caught between two worlds, she moved toward the only thing that mattered now, the truth, however classified, however hidden, finally being told. The broken-down van had been a sign, she realized. After 50 years of perfect maintenance, of never letting anything mechanical fail her, she'd broken down at the gates of Fort Benning. Right where someone would see her. Right where the tattoo would be noticed. Right where a 4-star general who remembered would be there to salute what everyone else had forgotten. Maybe there was no such thing as coincidence. Maybe some part of her had wanted to be found, wanted to stop running, wanted anyone to acknowledge that she'd been more than a ghost. Tomorrow, she would call Thomas. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of becoming real again. Tomorrow, the phantom would start to resurrect. But tonight, she was still a ghost, driving through the darkness, carrying the weight of the dead and the secrets of a unit that never existed. Tonight, she was still nobody, fixing her van on the side of the road, invisible to a world she'd helped save. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, finally, would be different. The New Mexico sun was different from Georgia's humid heat. It was dry, sharp, cutting through the windshield of Evelyn's van as she pulled into the dusty parking lot of Rodriguez Auto Repair. The shop sat on the outskirts of Albuquerque, a weathered building that looked like it had been standing since the 50s, defiant against desert winds and time itself. Miguel was waiting outside, and for a moment Evelyn didn't recognize him. The last time she'd seen him, they'd both been young, lean, deadly. Now he was stocky, gray-bearded, wearing coveralls that had seen better days. But when he smiled, she saw the ghost of the soldier she'd known, the one who could disassemble any weapon blindfolded and speak to assets in 7 languages. "Jesus Christ, Evelyn," he said as she stepped out of the van. "You look exactly the same, just weathered." "Like old leather," she agreed. And then they were embracing 2 old soldiers who weren't supposed to exist, holding on to each other, like life rafts in a storm that had lasted 50 years. The shop was closed for the day. Miguel had sent his employees home wanting privacy for this reunion that shouldn't be happening. He led her through the garage, past cars in various states of repair, to a small office in the back. The walls were covered with certifications, family photos, the detritus of a normal life. But in the corner, locked behind glass, was a shadow box containing medals that had no official record, a knife identical to the one the MPs had found in her van, and a faded photo of Unit 7. "My wife thinks they're from my regular service," Miguel said, pouring coffee from a pot that looked as old as the building. 3 years in the Army, honorable discharge, nothing special. She has no idea those 3 years were cover for 12 years of operations that never happened. "How do you live with it?" Evelyn asked, accepting the coffee. It was strong enough to strip paint exactly how they used to make it in safe houses around the world. "The lying, every marriage has secrets," Miguel said, but his eyes were sad. "Maria knows I have nightmares. She knows I wake up sometimes speaking languages she doesn't recognize. She knows there are things I can't tell her. But she loves me anyway, or maybe because of it. The mystery keeps things interesting after 30 years. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of unshared memories filling the space between them. Finally, Miguel pulled out a bottle of whiskey from his desk drawer, adding a generous amount to both their coffees. "Tell me about the general," he said. Thomas. He really remembered. Evelyn told him about the checkpoint, the MPs, the salute that had changed everything. Miguel listened occasionally, shaking his head in disbelief. "A 4-star general saluting you in front of his men," he said when she finished. "That's something. That's really something. It's dangerous is what it is. Those MPs are probably spreading the story already. Conspiracy theorists will have a field day. Let them. What are they going to find? We did our job too well. Every record destroyed, every witness relocated, or..." He didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what had happened to witnesses who couldn't be relocated. "Thomas has files," Evelyn said. "Photos, mission reports. He kept them all these years hidden in his office." Miguel's eyes widened. "That's a federal crime. Multiple federal crimes." "He says others have them too, people who remember, who think it's time for recognition." After 50 years, why now? Evelyn had been wondering the same thing. Maybe because there are so few of us left. Maybe because the Cold War is ancient history to most people now. Or maybe because someone finally grew a conscience. Miguel stood pacing to the window that looked out over the desert. "You know what I regret most, not the missions, not the killing, not even the lying. It's that we never got to mourn our dead properly. Remember when Jackson died in Laos? We had to leave his body there, couldn't even confirm he was dead to his family for 2 years. They told his wife he'd died in a training accident at Fort Bragg," Evelyn remembered. "She never knew he died saving a CIA station from being overrun. And Martinez, Thompson, Walsh, all of them dying alone, unknown. That's not right, Evelyn. Whatever else we did, whatever else we became, that's not right." The afternoon wore on as they talked, sharing intelligence they'd gathered over the years about their former teammates. Miguel had done better at keeping track, using his position as a business owner to travel to search to find what traces remained of Unit 7. "I found Cooper's daughter," he said at one point. "She's a teacher in Oregon. Has no idea her father was anything other than a traveling salesman who died in a car accident. Maybe that's better." "Is it?" She has his eyes, his way of tilting her head when she's thinking. She deserves to know her father was a hero. Heroes are remembered, Miguel. We were never meant to be heroes. We were meant to be invisible. And look where that got us. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of orange and red, Miguel's wife arrived. Maria Rodriguez was a small woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. She looked at Evelyn with the kind of careful assessment that came from years of living with a man who had secrets. "So you're the friend Miguel never talks about," she said, extending her hand. "The one from his army days." "Something like that," Evelyn replied, shaking her hand. "Will you stay for dinner? I'm making pozole." Evelyn looked at Miguel, who nodded slightly. "I'd like that." Dinner was a strange affair. Maria kept the conversation light, talking about their children, their grandchildren, the normal life Miguel had built on the foundation of lies. But Evelyn could see her watching, noting the way she and Miguel communicated in glances and half-sentences, the way they both checked exits without thinking, the way their hands never strayed far from potential weapons, even though the only threat was the past. After Maria went to bed, they sat on Miguel's back porch, looking at stars that seemed impossibly bright after the light pollution of cities. "I've been thinking about Thomas's offer," Miguel said. "The recognition, the benefits. Maria could use the money if something happens to me. And the idea of having it written down somewhere, even if it's classified. You're going to do it. I already called him. Meeting with some Pentagon people next week. They want to debrief me, get my story on record. He took a long drink from his beer. You should do it too. I'm still thinking. What's to think about? We're old, Evelyn. We don't have that much time left. Do you really want to die as nobody? I've been nobody for so long, I don't know how to be somebody again. Miguel turned to look at her. You were never nobody. You were shadow smoke, the thing enemies feared in the dark. That's not nobody. That's everything. They talked until dawn, the conversation meandering through memories and missions, through the years of silence and the weight of secrets. As the sun rose over the desert, Evelyn made her decision. Give me Thomas's number, she said. The one he gave you, not the one on his card. Miguel smiled, pulling out his phone. It's about time. The call was brief. Thomas answered on the second ring, as if he'd been waiting. Evelyn. I'll do it. The debriefing, the recognition, all of it. Thank God. Can you be in Washington next week? Yes. I'll have Peterson arrange everything. Evelyn, thank you. This matters more than you know. After she hung up, Miguel raised his beer in a toast. To Unit 7, to the phantoms finally stepping into the light. What light? Evelyn asked. It'll all still be classified. But it'll exist. Somewhere in some vault, the truth will exist. That's more than we've had for 50 years. The drive to Washington took 3 days. Evelyn could have flown, but she needed the time to prepare to sort through 50 years of memories and decide which ones to share. The van hummed along the interstate, repaired engine running perfectly, carrying her toward a reckoning she'd never thought would come. She stopped at a motel in Kansas and found herself unable to sleep. Instead, she sat at the small desk and began writing, trying to organize her thoughts. Names, dates, places, operations. The official version and the real version, though, sometimes she couldn't remember which was which anymore. Nicaragua, 1969. The rescue of Ambassador Patterson's daughter from rebels who didn't officially exist. She'd gone in alone, extracted the girl without a single shot fired, and delivered her to a safe house where her father was waiting. The papers reported that local police had rescued her. The rebels were never mentioned. East Berlin, 1971. The detection and elimination of a Soviet sleeper cell that had infiltrated NATO command. 6 months of surveillance, of becoming someone else, of getting close to targets who thought she was a secretary at the Canadian embassy. When it was over, 5 Soviet agents were dead, and NATO never knew how close they'd come to being compromised. Cambodia, 1973. The mission that went wrong, that cost them 3 operators and nearly started an international incident. They'd been sent to extract a crashed pilot who turned out to be carrying classified documents he shouldn't have had. The whole thing had been a setup, a test of Unit 7's loyalty. They'd passed, but the cost. She stopped writing when her hand started cramping. Pages and pages of notes, and she'd barely scratched the surface. How could she possibly convey the weight of it all to some Pentagon bureaucrat who'd never been in the field? The next day, crossing into Missouri, her phone rang. Unknown number. Carter? Ms. Carter, this is David Chen from the Washington Post. I'm calling about an interesting story I've been following. Something about a Unit 7. Her blood froze. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. I have sources telling me about an incident at Fort Benning. A general saluting a civilian. MPs talking about a woman with a military tattoo who was detained and then released. A woman who matches your description. You have the wrong number. I also have records of multiple deaths over the past 50 years. Former military personnel all dying under questionable circumstances, all with connections to something called Phantom Unit 7. I'm hanging up now. Wait, I'm not trying to expose anything. My father, his name was Andrew Chen. I think you knew him. Evelyn nearly dropped the phone. Andrew Chen. Brilliant operative, spoke Mandarin, Cantonese, Vietnamese, and Korean. Last she'd heard, he was in a nursing home in Seattle, lost to dementia. Your father, he's my father. Adopted, but still. He raised me. And sometimes when the dementia isn't too bad, he tells stories. Impossible stories about operations that never happened, about a unit that never existed, about a woman named Evelyn who could kill a man 17 different ways with a pencil. 23 ways, Evelyn corrected automatically, then cursed herself. So you did know him. Listen very carefully. Whatever you think you know, whatever story you're chasing, drop it. For your own safety and your father's, drop it. I can't. He's dying, Ms. Carter. The doctors say weeks, maybe days. And all he talks about is Unit 7, about needing to report in, about missions that need completing. The nurses think he's delusional, but I know my father. Even with dementia, he doesn't make things up. He's remembering something real. Evelyn pulled over at a rest stop, needing to focus on this conversation. What do you want? The truth. Not for publication, just for me. For him. So I can tell him that someone remembers that it wasn't all in his head. Where is he? Seattle VA Hospital Hospice Wing. I'll be there in 4 days. You'll come? He's Unit 7. We don't leave our people behind even 50 years later. She hung up and immediately called Thomas. He answered immediately. We have a problem, she said, explaining about the journalist. I'll handle it, Thomas said. No, he's Chen's son. Adopted son, but still. We owe him the truth, or at least part of it. That's not how classification works, Evelyn. Then make it work. Use your Pentagon connections. Give the boy something, anything, so he knows his father wasn't crazy. There was a long pause. I'll see what I can do. But you need to be in Washington as scheduled. I'll be there, after Seattle. The drive to Seattle was a blur of highways and memories of Andrew Chen. He'd been the youngest member of Unit 7, barely 20, when he joined. Brilliant, fearless, with a gift for languages and a smile that could charm information out of anyone. The dementia was cruel irony for someone whose greatest weapon had been his mind. The VA hospital was a sprawling complex that looked more like a prison than a medical facility. David Chen was waiting in the lobby, a man in his 40s with his father's eyes, but none of his easy charm. He looked tired, worn down by watching someone he loved disappear piece by piece. Thank you for coming, he said, shaking her hand. I didn't think you would. Your father was a good man, a good soldier. Was he? He has medals but no records. Photos with people who don't exist. Stories that can't be true but are too detailed to be false. Take me to him. Andrew Chen looked nothing like the young operative she'd known. He was skeletal, lost in a hospital bed that seemed too big for his shrunken frame. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at something only he could see. Dad, David said softly. There's someone here to see you. Andrew's eyes shifted slowly to Evelyn, and for a moment there was nothing. Then, like a light switching on, recognition flared. Phoenix, he whispered, using her old call sign. Phoenix reporting for duty. At ease, soldier, Evelyn said, her voice catching. She pulled a chair close to his bed, taking his hand. It felt like holding paper, brittle and light. Mission complete. The package, did we get the package out? She knew what he was talking about. Tehran, 1973. They'd extracted a nuclear scientist and his family hours before the SAVAK would have arrested them. It had been Andrew's first major operation. Package delivered safely, she assured him. All packages accounted for. He relaxed slightly, but his eyes remained troubled. The unit. Where's the unit? Scattered but safe. Miguel's in New Mexico. I just saw him. He sends his regards. And the others? She couldn't tell him the truth that most were dead. They're at peace, Andrew. All at peace. The records, he said urgently, gripping her hand with surprising strength. They destroyed the records. No one will know. They'll know, Evelyn said. I promise you they'll know. General Thomas remembers. He's making sure we're all remembered. David leaned forward. Dad, was it real Unit 7, the operations? Andrew's eyes shifted to his son, and for a moment perfect clarity returned. Every word, every mission. We saved the world a dozen times and no one ever knew. He looked back at Evelyn. Tell him, Phoenix. Tell him who we were. Evelyn looked at David, this civilian who'd stumbled into a world of shadows because he loved his father. We were America's invisible shield, she said carefully. When the Cold War threatened to turn hot, when enemies operated in spaces between laws and borders, we were there. Your father was one of the best intelligence operatives this country never acknowledged. But why the secrecy? Why erase everything? Because that's what made us effective. We didn't exist, so we couldn't be predicted, couldn't be countered, couldn't be used for propaganda. We were ghosts, and ghosts don't leave records. Andrew's breathing was becoming labored. A nurse entered, checking his monitors with practiced efficiency. He needs rest, she said gently but firmly. Evelyn stood, but Andrew held her hand. Phoenix, the tattoo. You remember why we got them? So we'd always know each other, even in the dark, even in death. Show him, show my son. Evelyn rolled up her sleeve, revealing the phoenix and 7 stars. David gasped. Dad has the same one, exactly the same. We all did. Those of us who survived the first 5 years. It was our way of saying we existed even if nothing else did. Andrew smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. Unit 7, best of the best. Best of the best, she agreed. As they left the room, David was crying. Thank you, he said. For coming, for telling me something, anything. Your father was a hero, Evelyn said. That's all you need to know. He saved lives, protected America, and did it all without asking for recognition or glory. There are maybe 100 people in the world who know what Unit 7 really was, and now you're one of them. Will you tell me more? The stories, the operations. I can't. But remember this. Every time you read about a crisis that didn't happen, a war that didn't start, a terrorist who mysteriously disappeared before they could act, consider that maybe, just maybe, it was because of men like your father. She left Seattle that night, driving through rain that reminded her of operations in Southeast Asia. Andrew Chen would be dead within days, she knew. Another ghost finally laying down his burden. Soon it would just be her and Miguel, the last witnesses to a secret war that had saved countless lives. Washington, D.C. hadn't changed much since her last visit, though that had been in 1975, the day Unit 7 was officially disbanded. She'd stood in a basement room at the Pentagon, while a man, whose name she never learned, told her she was now civilian Evelyn Carter, that her service record had been expunged, that speaking of Unit 7 to anyone would result in federal prosecution. Now, 50 years later, she was back in the Pentagon, but this time in an office with windows, with men and women who looked at her with something approaching awe. Ms. Carter, the lead interviewer, a woman named Sarah Matthews, who worked for some intelligence oversight committee, began. We want to start by saying that what's happening here is unprecedented. We're creating a classified record of Unit 7's operations, not for public release, but for historical preservation within the intelligence community. Why now? Evelyn asked. Because we're losing institutional memory. The people who knew about Unit 7, who ran it, who benefited from it, they're all retiring or dying. We've already lost so much. We can't lose the rest. For 3 days, they debriefed her. Every operation she could remember, every technique, every success and failure. They had maps, photos, some documents she thought had been destroyed. They knew more than she'd expected, but not nearly enough. Tell us about Operation Springboard, Matthews said on the second day. Cuba, 1970, Evelyn responded. We inserted via submarine, spent 6 weeks mapping Soviet missile installations that weren't supposed to exist. How many of you saw? 4. Myself, Chen, Rodriguez, and Williams. Williams didn't make it out. The records say he died in a training accident at Fort Bragg. The records are wrong. He died ensuring we had proof of Soviet violations of the missile crisis agreements. That proof prevented a nuclear war. On and on it went. They were particularly interested in the psychological aspects, how Unit 7 had selected and trained its operators. We were looking for people who could become no one, Evelyn explained. Not just operate undercover, but truly become different people to the point where we sometimes lost ourselves. The training was as much about mental conditioning as physical skills. Is that why so many Unit 7 operators had difficulties after disbandment? We were trained to be weapons. Then we were told to be normal. You can't flip that switch easily. Some never managed it. Thomas joined them on the 3rd day, bringing with him a sealed folder. This is your new service record, he said, classified but official. You retired as a full colonel in 1985 with full benefits backdated. There's also this. He pulled out a metal case. Inside was the Distinguished Intelligence Cross, the highest honor the CIA could bestow. I'm not CIA, Evelyn said. Unit 7 has been retroactively placed under CIA authority for administrative purposes, Matthews explained. It's the only way we could recognize your service within existing frameworks. And if I don't want recognition, then you can walk away. But Ms. Carter, Evelyn, you've earned this. All of you have. That night in her hotel room, Evelyn stared at the medal. Such a small thing to represent so much sacrifice. She thought of Martinez dying under that bridge, of Thompson's suicide note, of all the ghosts who'd never know they were finally being acknowledged. Her phone rang. Miguel. How did it go? They gave me a medal. Just one, we deserve a chestful. Chen's dying. Maybe already dead. His son knows about us now. Good. Someone should. Someone besides the spooks and the bureaucrats. Miguel, do you ever regret it? All of it. There was a long pause. I regret that we had to exist. I regret that the world needed us. But I don't regret what we did. We were the thin line, Evelyn. We held it. Yeah, we held it. There's going to be a ceremony. Classified just a few people, but Thomas wants to do something official. Will you come? When? Next month. They're even talking about a memorial wall at Langley. No names, just stars, but something. A memorial wall. Stars for ghosts. It was more than she'd ever thought they'd get. I'll be there. After she hung up, Evelyn walked to the window looking out at the lights of D.C. Somewhere in this city were the rooms where decisions had been made to create Unit 7, to use them, to discard them. Somewhere were the files that would now prove they'd existed. The tattoo on her arm seemed to pulse with warmth. Phoenix rising from water, 7 stars for 7 teams that had changed the course of history in shadows. She'd gotten it as an act of defiance. Now it was becoming something else. A badge of honor, even if only a handful of people would ever know what it meant. Tomorrow she would drive back to her empty life, to the van that had no real home, to the existence that wasn't quite real. But something had changed. The phantom had been acknowledged. The ghost had been seen. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough to balance 50 years of denial. But it was something. And for now, something was everything. The call came at 3 in the morning, 2 weeks after she'd left Washington. Evelyn had parked her van at a rest stop in Colorado, unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong. When her phone rang, she knew before answering that it would be bad news. "Evelyn, it's David Chen." His voice was thick with grief. "Dad passed away an hour ago." She sat up in the narrow bed she'd installed in the back of the van, looking out at the star-filled sky. Was it peaceful? He was talking about Unit 7 until the end. About a mission in Bangkok, something about a monastery and hidden weapons. The nurses thought he was hallucinating. He wasn't. That was 1972. We stopped a coup attempt by intercepting weapons being stored in Buddhist temples. Your father went undercover as a monk for 3 months. My God. He never said anything about that when he was lucid. He couldn't. Even with dementia the training held. He kept his secrets until his mind couldn't distinguish between what was classified and what was memory. David was quiet for a moment. "There's going to be a service. Small, just family and a few friends. Would you come? I know it's a lot to ask, but you're the only one who really knew him, knew what he was." Went Thursday, Seattle. "I'll be there." She arrived in Seattle Wednesday evening, the van protesting the mountain passes, but holding together. The city was shrouded in its typical gray mist, the kind of weather that had always reminded her of operations in Northern Europe. She checked into a motel near the cemetery, then called Miguel. "Chen's dead," she said without preamble. "Damn." How peacefully in his sleep. "His son called me." "You're going to the funeral. Someone from the unit should be there." "Be careful, Evelyn. Funerals are where covers get blown. Too many people, too many questions." "It's been 50 years, Miguel. Who's going to care about one old woman at a funeral?" But she knew he was right. She'd spent decades avoiding gatherings, places where someone might recognize her, might ask questions she couldn't answer. Even now, with official recognition in a classified file somewhere, she was still living in shadows. The funeral was small, as David had promised. Maybe 30 people gathered at the graveside on a hill overlooking Puget Sound. Evelyn stood at the back wearing a black dress she'd bought at a thrift store that morning. She'd almost worn her dress uniform, the one she'd kept hidden in a storage unit for decades. But that would have raised questions Andrew wouldn't have wanted answered. David gave a eulogy that danced around the truth, talking about his father's service to country, his dedication to duty, his love of languages and cultures. He mentioned the Army, the 3 years of official service, but nothing more. When he caught Evelyn's eye, she saw the weight of unspoken knowledge in his gaze. After the service, as people gathered at David's house for the reception, an older Asian woman approached Evelyn. She was elegant, well-dressed, with eyes that missed nothing. "You knew Andrew," she said. It wasn't a question. "A long time ago," Evelyn replied carefully. "I'm his sister, biological sister. He found me in the 90s after the adoption records were unsealed." She studied Evelyn's face. He mentioned someone named Phoenix once. When the dementia was bad, he called out that name. Evelyn's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. I'm sorry for your loss. He said Phoenix saved his life, more than once. The woman stepped closer. Was that you? Your brother was a good man, Evelyn said, not answering directly. He deserved better than what he got. Yes, he did. Whatever he did, whoever he really was, he deserved better than dying with secrets. Before Evelyn could respond, David appeared at her elbow. Aunt Lily, this is Evelyn Carter. She served with Dad. Lily's eyes sharpened. Served where his records only show 3 years at Fort Ord. That's all I'm authorized to say, Evelyn said quietly. Understanding dawned in Lily's eyes. Black Ops, he was Black Ops. Aunt Lily, David said warningly. It's all right, she said, touching David's arm. I always knew there was more. A language specialist with his skills doesn't spend 3 years filing papers in California. She looked back at Evelyn. Thank you. For whatever you did, wherever you did it. And for being here today. Evelyn stayed for another hour, listening to stories about Andrew's life after Unit 7. How he'd adopted David from a Korean orphanage. How he'd worked as a translator for the State Department, using his skills in the open finally. How he'd married late in life to a woman who'd died 5 years ago, before the dementia took hold. He built a life, David said, standing with her by a window that looked out at the Sound. Despite everything, he built a real life. More than most of us managed, Evelyn admitted. What about you family career after the military? I fixed things. Cars, motorcycles, anything mechanical. Kept moving, kept busy. That's not a life. That's just existence. She looked at this man who'd grown up with a hero for a father and never knew it. Sometimes existence is enough. As she was leaving, David pressed something into her hand. It was a photograph, old and creased. It showed Andrew in civilian clothes, but she recognized the location immediately. Bangkok, the monastery where he'd spent 3 months undercover. He was smiling, looking directly at the camera, unguarded in a way she'd rarely seen him. He had dozens of photos from places he supposedly never went, David said. I thought you might want this one. I can't take this. It's your history. It's yours too. Besides, I have copies. Dad was meticulous about preserving things, even things that officially didn't exist. Driving away from Seattle, the photo tucked into her visor. Evelyn felt the weight of being the last witness. Miguel was still alive, still fixing cars in New Mexico. But Andrew's death had hit her harder than expected. Another ghost laid to rest, another voice that could testify to what they'd done, now silent. Her phone rang as she crossed into Oregon. It was Thomas. I heard about Chen, he said. I'm sorry. How did you hear? We're monitoring all Unit 7 personnel, even the deceased ones, part of the recognition process. Monitoring. Is that what you call it? Protecting Evelyn. There are still people who'd prefer Unit 7 stay buried, foreign and domestic. After 50 years, especially after 50 years, do you know how many operations you ran that are still affecting global politics? The Iranian situation alone, we did what we were ordered to do. I know. That's why we're protecting you. There's something else. Can you come back to DC? I was just there. This is different. There's someone who wants to meet you. Someone important. How important? Cabinet level. Evelyn pulled over, needing to focus on this conversation. Why would someone at that level care about Unit 7? Because his father was saved by Unit 7. Tehran, 1979. A diplomatic family evacuated hours before the embassy was taken. She remembered that operation. The chaos, the crowds, the narrow window they'd had to extract priority targets. The Morrison family. Secretary of State James Morrison. He was 12 when you got his family out. He remembers you, Evelyn. He remembers a woman who appeared out of nowhere, led them through back alleys to a safe house, then disappeared. That's impossible. No one saw my face clearly. He saw your tattoo. You'd pushed up your sleeves because of the heat. A phoenix with 7 stars. He drew it once, for his father asked what it meant. His father, who had clearance, told him it meant they'd been saved by angels. We weren't angels. To that 12-year-old boy you were. Will you meet him? She thought about it. Another breach in the wall of secrecy. Another person who wanted to thank her for something that had never officially happened. When, next week, there's more Evelyn. Morrison is pushing for something bigger. He wants Unit 7 members to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Classified ceremony, no public announcement, but official recognition at the highest level. That's impossible. A year ago I would have agreed. But Morrison has influence, and he has a story that resonates. American heroes abandoned by their country, left to die alone and unrecognized. It's powerful, especially with an election coming up. We're not political pawns, Marcus. No, you're not. That's why this has to be done right. Quietly, respectfully, with no fanfare. Will you come? Let me think about it. She drove through the night, her mind churning. The Morrison extraction had been one of their cleaner operations. No shots fired, no bodies left behind, just a family delivered safely to an extraction point where a helicopter waited to take them to a carrier in the Gulf. She'd never thought about what happened to them after, whether that 12-year-old boy had grown up remembering the woman who'd saved him. By dawn, she was in Northern California, parked at a overlook, watching the sun rise over mountains that reminded her of Afghanistan, before the Soviets, before the Taliban, when it had just been a beautiful, harsh land where empires went to die. Her phone rang again. Miguel. You hear about this medal thing? He asked without preamble. Thomas just told me. It's spreading, Evelyn. Word about Unit 7. There are people in the Pentagon, the CIA State Department, all suddenly interested in us. After 50 years of pretending we didn't exist. Times change. Cold War's ancient history now. What we did doesn't threaten anyone's current operations. Hell, half the countries we operated in don't even exist anymore. What do you think we should do? Take the recognition while we can. We're old, Evelyn. How many more chances are we going to get? She knew he was right. At 62, with her body carrying the accumulated damage of dozens of operations, she didn't have unlimited time. Neither did Miguel. They were the last of Unit 7 still capable of telling their story. I'll go to D.C., she said. Meet Morrison. See what he's proposing. Good. And Evelyn Chen would have wanted this. Recognition, even if it's classified. He would have wanted his son to know his father was a hero. After the call, she sat in the van thinking about Andrew Chen, about all of them. They'd signed up to be shadows, yes, but they'd also signed up to serve their country. The country had used them, then discarded them, but now finally it seemed ready to acknowledge what they'd done. Her phone buzzed with a text from David Chen. It was a photo from his father's effects Unit 7, at some unnamed base, all of them young and fierce and ready to save the world. She was there, standing next to Andrew, both of them trying not to smile because the photographer had just told a joke about a CIA operative and a Russian walk into a bar. Found this in Dad's safe, David had written. Thought you should see it. You all looked like heroes. We looked like kids, she texted back. But he was right. They had been heroes even if no one had known it. The drive to Washington took 4 days. She could have flown, but the van had become her home, her safety, her connection to a life that was real, even if nothing else was. Besides, she needed time to prepare for meeting Morrison, for whatever came next. She arrived in D.C. on a Tuesday evening, the city humid and sweltering, in the way that always reminded her of Southeast Asian operations. Thomas had arranged a hotel room, a nice one, with a view of the Potomac, but she felt exposed there, vulnerable. After decades of motels and parking lots, luxury felt like a trap. The meeting was scheduled for the next morning at the State Department. She spent the evening going through her limited wardrobe, finally settling on a simple blue dress that didn't scream former operative but didn't look like she'd been living in a van either. She barely slept, her mind running through scenarios, possibilities, dangers. What if this was all an elaborate setup? What if someone had decided Unit 7 members were liabilities that needed to be eliminated? Paranoia had kept her alive for 50 years. She wasn't about to abandon it now. But when morning came and she walked into the State Department building, passing through security that seemed oddly deferential, she found only James Morrison, Secretary of State, standing in a private conference room with tears in his eyes. "Ms. Carter," he said, and his voice broke slightly. "I've been waiting 46 years to say thank you." He was tall, distinguished with silver hair, and the kind of presence that commanded rooms. But in his eyes, she could still see that terrified 12-year-old boy she'd led through the chaos of Tehran. "You remember," she said. "Every detail. You appeared in our apartment like a ghost. My parents were packing, panicking, arguing about what to take. You told them to leave everything except passports and family photos. You said memories were lighter than possessions." She remembered saying that, remembered the way his mother had clutched a jewelry box until Evelyn had gently taken it from her, explaining that they needed to move fast and light. "You had a tattoo," Morrison continued. "When we were running through an alley and you pushed up your sleeves, I saw it. A phoenix with stars. I'd never seen anything like it. Your father knew what we were. He suspected. He had clearance, knew about certain special operations units. But he never said anything, just told me that sometimes angels wore combat boots. We weren't angels, Mr. Secretary. No, but you saved us. My family, dozens of other families. You gave me the chance to grow up, to serve my country, to have children of my own." He moved to the window, looking out at the city. "Do you know what happened to the families that didn't get out?" "Yes." "Then you know what you saved us from. Not just death, but years of captivity, of being pawns in political games." He turned back to her. "I've spent my entire career in public service trying to be worthy of the second chance you gave me. You don't owe us anything. I owe you everything, which is why I'm pushing for recognition. Real recognition, not just classified files that no one will ever see." Thomas mentioned the Medal of Freedom. "It's the least we can do. You and the surviving members of Unit 7 deserve to be honored by your country, even if that honor can never be public. There are only 2 of us left, Miguel Rodriguez and myself." Morrison's face fell. "Only 2. The others died over the years, alone mostly, forgotten. Then we honor them posthumously. Their families deserve to know. Most don't have families. The job wasn't conducive to relationships." Morrison sat down across from her. "Tell me about them. The ones who didn't make it." For the next 2 hours, she told him about Unit 7. Not the operations, those were still classified beyond even his clearance, but about the people. Martinez, the linguist who could make anyone laugh. Thompson, the sniper who wrote poetry between missions. Walsh, the demolitions expert who'd wanted to be a teacher. All the ghosts who'd saved the world and died unknown. "There has to be a record," Morrison said when she finished. Their names, their service, it has to be preserved somewhere. Thomas is working on that. A memorial wall at Langley Stars for each operative. Not enough. I want more. He pulled out a file. I've been researching what I can access about Unit 7. The operations, I can see the fragments that weren't completely destroyed. Do you realize the scope of what you prevented: nuclear exchanges, biological weapons, terrorist attacks that would have killed thousands? You changed history. We did our job. You did more than that. You held the line when the world was balanced on a knife's edge. He leaned forward. I want to create a proper archive. Classified, yes, but comprehensive. Video testimonies, documents, everything we can gather. Future intelligence operatives need to know what you did, how you did it. That could be dangerous. Our methods, our sources, all dead or obsolete after 50 years. The world has changed, Ms. Carter. The threats are different. The technology has evolved. But the principles, the dedication, the sacrifice, those are timeless. She thought about it. A record that would outlive them all, that would ensure Unit 7 wasn't completely forgotten, even if it could never be publicly acknowledged. You'd need Miguel's agreement too, she said. I'll fly him here, whatever it takes. Morrison stood. There's someone else who wants to meet you. Someone who was also in Tehran. The door opened and a woman entered. She was in her 60s, well-preserved, with eyes that held both strength and old pain. Evelyn Carter, Morrison said. This is my sister, Catherine. She was 14 when you saved us. Catherine's handshake was firm, but her eyes were wet. I remember you telling me to be brave, she said. That fear was just information, not a command. I've lived my whole life by those words. You remember that? I remember everything about that night. The way you moved like smoke, the way you seemed to know every alley and doorway, the way you made us feel safe even though the world was falling apart around us. We were trained for extraction operations. You were trained to be heroes, Catherine corrected, even if no one was supposed to know. They talked for another hour, the Morrison siblings sharing their memories of that night, of the life they'd built afterward. James had gone into diplomacy, eventually rising to Secretary of State. Catherine had become a doctor specializing in trauma surgery, saving lives in her own way. We've never forgotten, James said as the meeting ended. And now we have the power to make sure no one else forgets either. Will you help us, Ms. Carter? Will you let us honor Unit 7 properly? I need to talk to Miguel. Of course. Take all the time you need. But know this, with or without your cooperation, I'm going to ensure Unit 7 gets recognition. You deserve that much. As she left the State Department, Evelyn felt something she hadn't experienced in 50 years: visibility. Not the dangerous kind that got operatives killed, but the kind that said her service had mattered, that the sacrifices had been worth something. Her phone rang as she reached her van. It was Thomas. How did it go? He remembers me. Both of them do. The Morrison extraction was one of your finest operations. We lost Hendricks on that one. You saved 43 people and only lost one operative. In that chaos, it was a miracle. Tell that to Hendricks's family. Oh wait, you can't. They think he died in a car accident in Nevada. That's going to change, Evelyn. Morrison is serious about this. He's already got the president's ear. And what does the president think about honoring people who technically never existed? He thinks it's long overdue. His own father was Army intelligence during Vietnam. He understands the shadow world. That evening she met Miguel at a restaurant in Georgetown. He'd flown in that morning looking uncomfortable in a suit that didn't quite fit right. I feel like I'm about to testify before Congress, he said, pulling at his tie. In a way you are. Morrison wants everything. Our stories, our methods, our memories. Do we trust him? He was 12 when we saved his family. He's built his entire life on that second chance. That doesn't answer my question. She thought about it. Yes, I trust him. He's not trying to use us or expose us. He genuinely wants to honor what we did. Even if that honor is classified, especially because it's classified. He understands that public recognition would make us targets, would compromise ongoing operations that evolved from our work. He just wants the truth to exist somewhere. They ate in companionable silence for a while, two old soldiers who'd learned that sometimes words were unnecessary. Finally, Miguel spoke. I've been thinking about death lately. Not in a morbid way, just realistically. We're not young, Evelyn. When we die, Unit 7 dies with us unless we do something. The files Thomas is creating. Files are just paper. Morrison is offering more. He's offering to make us real, to prove we existed, that we mattered. We mattered whether anyone knows it or not. Did we? If a tree falls in a classified forest and all the witnesses are dead, did it make a sound? She laughed, surprising herself. That's either very profound or very stupid. Story of my life. He raised his beer. To Andrew Chen. To all of them. To Unit 7. They clinked glasses, and for a moment, she could almost feel the presence of the others, all the ghosts gathering, for one last toast. The next morning they met with Morrison, and a team of historians and archivists who specialized in classified materials. The questions were detailed, but respectful, focusing not just on operations, but on the human cost, the psychological impact, the price of being erased. How did you maintain cover identities for extended periods? One historian asked. You became the cover, Miguel answered. There was no pretending. For those months, you were that person completely. The challenge was remembering who you really were when the operation ended. And the psychological toll. Imagine being schizophrenic by choice, Evelyn said. Multiple personalities, all of them real when they needed to be. Some of us never found our way back to our original selves. They recorded everything. Hours of testimony about operations that had shaped the Cold War, about techniques that had evolved into modern intelligence practices, about the human beings behind the code names and classified files. At one point, Morrison asked about the tattoos. It was rebellion, Evelyn explained. We were told to leave no traces to be invisible. The tattoo was our way of saying we existed, that we were more than just tools. Who designed it? Martinez. He was an artist before recruitment. Said the phoenix represented resurrection rising from ashes. The 7 stars were for the 7 original teams. How many people got the tattoo? 15, maybe 20. Only those who survived the first 5 years, who proved they could handle the psychological pressure. And now, Miguel and I are the only ones left who carry it. Morrison had them roll up their sleeves, photographing the matching tattoos for the archive. The phoenix seemed to shimmer in the office lights, its 7 stars bright against aged skin. These will be preserved, Morrison promised, along with everything else. Your story, your sacrifice, it will survive even if it's never public. The archives took 3 weeks to compile. Evelyn and Miguel spent their days in a secure facility beneath the State Department, speaking into cameras that would preserve their words in digital vaults, handling photographs and documents, with gloved hands, recreating operations on maps that would be classified for another 100 years. On the 10th day, something unexpected happened. A man appeared in the doorway of their workspace, elderly, but carrying himself with military precision. Evelyn recognized him immediately, though she hadn't seen him in 48 years. Kowalski, she breathed. Stanley Kowalski, Unit 7, operative supposedly dead since 1977. He smiled the same crooked grin that had gotten them through impossible situations in Prague, in Beirut, in a dozen places that didn't officially exist. "Hello, Phoenix," he said using her old call sign. "Miguel, heard you were finally telling our story." Miguel was on his feet, crossing the room in 3 strides to embrace the man they'd mourned for decades. "Stan, Jesus Christ, how your file says you died in a car accident in Montana." That was the cover. Truth is, they gave me a choice. Disappear completely or face prosecution for knowing too much about the wrong operations. I chose to disappear. "All these years," Evelyn said, her voice tight with emotion. "You let us think you were dead. Better than being actually dead. There were people, powerful people, who wanted Unit 7 buried literally, not just figuratively. My death was the price of keeping the rest of you safe." Morrison, who had been watching from the doorway, stepped forward. "Mr. Kowalski has been in witness protection, a special program for intelligence operatives whose knowledge made them targets. When I started this project, we reached out to see if any other Unit 7 members might be in similar situations." "How many?" Evelyn asked. "Just me," Kowalski said. "The others really are gone. But I've been watching, keeping track when I could. Saw you once, Evelyn, at a gas station in Wyoming maybe 15 years ago. Almost said something, but my handler was watching. You could have sent word, let us know you were alive. And risk exposing you, no. My silence was part of the deal. Keep quiet, stay dead, and Unit 7's surviving members stay safe." He looked older than his 70 years, worn down by decades of being nobody. "But when Morrison's people contacted me, told me about the recognition, the archive, I knew it was time." They spent the rest of the day catching up, filling in decades of blank space. Kowalski had lived in Idaho under an assumed name, working as a hunting guide, using his tracking skills for tourists instead of targets. He'd married a widow with 2 children, became a stepfather and grandfather, built a life that was quiet and real, even if his name wasn't. "The hardest part was not being able to tell them," he said, looking at a photo of his family. "My stepson joined the Marines, served in Iraq. I wanted to tell him I understood that I'd been there too, but I couldn't. Had to pretend to be just a civilian who didn't understand what he'd seen." "We all made sacrifices," Miguel said. "But we all made them differently," Kowalski replied. "You stayed connected to your past, even if you couldn't talk about it." Evelyn kept moving, never settling. "I buried myself so deep I sometimes forgot who I'd been." Morrison's team adjusted their plans to include Kowalski's testimony. 3 surviving members of Unit 7 instead of 2, it was more than they'd hoped for. The archives grew richer with each story, each perspective on operations that had shaped history. On the 15th day, they received another surprise. A package arrived from Switzerland, sent through diplomatic channels. Inside was a manuscript, handwritten 500 pages of neat script. The cover letter was brief: "I am dying. Cancer, maybe 3 months left. I was Unit 7, 1968 to 1975. My name then was Rebecca Foster. I've been Catherine Dumont for 47 years. This is everything I remember. Do with it what you will. Tell Miguel and Phoenix they were the best soldiers I ever served with." Ghost. Evelyn's hands shook as she held the letter. Rebecca Foster. She remembered her brilliant operative could blend into any situation, spoke 6 languages fluently. They'd thought she'd died in a plane crash in 1976. "Another one alive," Miguel said wonderingly. "How many of us faked our deaths?" "As many as needed to," Morrison said quietly. "We're finding evidence that certain elements within the intelligence community wanted Unit 7 eliminated after disbandment. They knew too much, had too many skills, were too independent. Easier to kill them or make them disappear than risk them going rogue. We would never have gone rogue, Evelyn said sharply. You know that. I know that. But paranoid intelligence officials in the 70s, they saw threats everywhere, even from their own people. Rebecca's manuscript was a treasure trove of information. Operations Evelyn had forgotten details about missions that had been lost to time analysis of techniques that had evolved into modern special operations doctrine. But more than that, it was a human document full of fear and courage, sacrifice and loss, the cost of being a ghost in service to a country that denied your existence. She writes about you, Kowalski said, reading a section. Listen to this. Phoenix was our moral compass. When the lines blurred, when we couldn't tell right from wrong anymore, we looked to her. She never lost sight of why we were doing this, even when the rest of us were drowning in moral ambiguity. That's not how I remember it, Evelyn said. I was drowning too. We all were. Maybe that's what made you the compass, Miguel suggested. You drowned but kept swimming anyway. They worked to integrate Rebecca's manuscript into the archive, cross-referencing her memories with their own building, a more complete picture of Unit 7's operations. Morrison brought in experts in Cold War history, people with clearances high enough to understand the context of what they were reading. This changes everything we thought we knew about certain events. One historian said, reading about an operation in East Germany, the official history says the Berlin situation in 1971 was resolved through diplomacy. This says Unit 7 eliminated a rogue Soviet general who was planning to start World War III. History is written by the winners, Evelyn said, but it's edited by the intelligence services. On the 20th day, as they were nearing completion of the initial archive, Thomas arrived with news. The President has agreed to the Medal of Freedom ceremony, he announced. Classified, no public record, but official. He wants to do it next week. For all of us, Miguel asked. All surviving members and posthumous awards for the others. The families who can be located will be notified that their loved ones received a classified honor for service to the country. What about those of us who are supposed to be dead? Kowalski asked. You'll receive yours under your current identity. The citation will be vague enough to protect operational security, but specific enough to honor your service. Evelyn thought about all the ghosts who wouldn't be there, all the members of Unit 7 who died thinking they'd been forgotten. It should have happened 50 years ago. Yes, Thomas agreed. It should have. But at least it's happening now. The ceremony was scheduled for the following Friday in a secure room in the White House that most people didn't know existed. Morrison arranged for Rebecca Foster to be flown in from Switzerland, though she was so weak from cancer treatment that she'd need a wheelchair. The night before the ceremony, the 4 surviving members of Unit 7 gathered in Morrison's office. Rebecca was thin to the point of transparency, her body failing, but her eyes still sharp. She looked at the others with a mixture of joy and sorrow. I never thought I'd see any of you again, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. 47 years of being someone else, and now at the end I get to be me again. Why didn't you reach out? Evelyn asked. After things calmed down after the Cold War ended. Fear becomes habit, Rebecca replied. I built a life as Catherine, had a daughter who thinks her mother is a retired translator. How could I tell her that everything she knew about me was a lie? It wasn't all a lie, Miguel said. You were a translator. You just also happened to be one of the most deadly intelligence operatives America ever produced. Rebecca laughed, which turned into a cough. When she recovered, she said, Remember Budapest? When we had to extract that defector from the Soviet embassy. You seduced the guard, Kowalski recalled. Convinced him you were a lost tourist, got him to walk you right through security. While Phoenix climbed through the ventilation system and Miguel set up sniper coverage from the building across the street, Rebecca added. We were so young, so certain we could do anything. We could do anything, Evelyn said. We did do everything they asked of us. And more, Rebecca agreed. Always more. They talked through the night, 4 old soldiers sharing stories that no one else would understand or believe. As dawn broke over Washington, Morrison arrived with coffee and news. There's been a development, he said. The Russian government has reached out through back channels. They know about the ceremony, about the recognition of Unit 7. How? Miguel demanded. Unknown. But they're not threatening anything. In fact, they want to contribute to the archive. Apparently you were legendary among their intelligence services. They called you Prizraki, the ghosts. There's a retired KGB general who wants to provide his perspective on Unit 7 operations, how you affected Soviet planning. That's insane, Kowalski said. They were our enemies. Were, Morrison emphasized. Past tense. The Cold War is over. The current Russian government sees value in acknowledging the professionalism of that era's intelligence operations. They're offering a quid pro quo. They'll provide information about Unit 7's impact on Soviet operations if we acknowledge certain of their Cold War intelligence successes. It's a trap, Evelyn said immediately. Maybe. Or maybe it's just history wanting to be complete. The general in question, Volkov, specifically mentioned you, Evelyn. Said you were the most formidable opponent he ever faced. Volkov's alive. Evelyn was genuinely surprised. I thought we killed him in Prague. That was his body double. He's 91, living in Moscow, writing his memoirs. He wants to include a chapter on Unit 7 with your permission. The idea of their enemies acknowledging them was surreal, but somehow fitting. They'd spent decades in the shadows, fighting a war that never officially happened against enemies who didn't officially exist. Now, in their twilight years, even the enemies wanted the truth to be told. Let him write his chapter, Rebecca said. We're all too old for the secrets to matter anymore. The day of the ceremony arrived gray and rainy, fitting weather for honoring ghosts. They were driven to the White House in separate cars for security, though Evelyn wondered who exactly they were being secured from. Anyone who wanted them dead had had 50 years to act. The room was small, intimate. The president was younger than any of them, a man who'd been a child when Unit 7 was conducting its most dangerous operations. But he spoke with genuine respect about service and sacrifice, about the debts America owed to those who fought its secret wars. You were asked to be invisible, he said, looking at each of them. To sacrifice not just your livsang, but your very existence for your country. You were asked to be forgotten, to die unmourned and unremembered. That was wrong. America failed you, and for that I apologize. The medals were presented quietly without fanfare. Rebecca had to be supported to stand, but she stood, tears streaming down her face as the president placed the medal around her neck. For service above and beyond the call of duty, he said to each of them. For sacrifice that cannot be measured. For honor that cannot be diminished by time or secrecy. When it was over, they posed for a single photograph that would be classified for 100 years. 4 elderly people with medals they couldn't publicly display, representing a unit that didn't officially exist, honored by a country that had tried to forget them. As they were leaving, the president pulled Evelyn aside. Morrison tells me you were the heart of Unit 7, he said. We all were. That's what made us effective. What made you willing to sacrifice so much? She thought about it. We believed in something bigger than ourselves. We believed that what we were doing mattered, that we were preventing wars, saving lives. And we were right. Every mission we completed, every operation we succeeded in, meant people got to live normal lives unaware of how close they'd come to disaster. Do you regret it? I regret that it was necessary. I regret that the world needed us. But I don't regret serving. Outside the White House, the four of them stood in the rain medals hidden beneath their coats, looking like any other group of elderly tourists. What now? Kowalski asked. Now we finish the archive, Morrison said, joining them with an umbrella. Make sure the full story is preserved. And then you live. Really live. No more hiding, no more running. You've earned the right to exist. I don't have much time left, Rebecca said quietly. Maybe weeks. Then we make them count, Evelyn said, taking her arm. We tell every story, share every memory. We make sure Unit 7 is remembered, even if it's only in classified files. They spent Rebecca's last weeks doing exactly that. Every day they gathered at the archive facility, recording everything they could remember. Other people began arriving, CIA officers who'd been supported by Unit 7 operations military personnel, who'd been saved by their interventions, diplomats, who'd benefited from their intelligence gathering. I never knew who you were, one former ambassador said, but I knew someone was watching over us. Every time we thought we were in danger, somehow the threat would disappear. Now I know it was you. David Chen flew in from Seattle with boxes of his father's effects, including detailed journals written in code that Rebecca was able to partially decode before her strength failed. He documented everything, David said in wonder. Every mission, every operation. He knew someday someone would want to know the truth. The Russian General Volkov sent his chapter through diplomatic channels. It was respectful, even admiring, describing Unit 7 as worthy opponents who prevented nuclear war at least 3 times through their interventions. He included operational details from the Soviet side that filled gaps in their own memories. We were better than we knew, Miguel said, reading Volkov's account. He says Soviet intelligence changed their entire operational structure because of us. We changed history, Kowalski added. Multiple times. Rebecca died on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after the ceremony. She was in the archive facility, having insisted on being brought there, even though she could barely speak. Her last words were, "Tell them we mattered." At her memorial service officially for Catherine. Dumont retired. Translator Morrison read a letter from the president, acknowledging her service in vague but meaningful terms. Her daughter, confused but proud, accepted a folded flag and a medal she couldn't quite understand. My mother had secrets, she said to Evelyn after the service. I always knew that. Thank you for helping her share them, even if I can't know what they were. Your mother was a hero, Evelyn told her. That's all you need to know. With Rebecca gone, only 3 remained. They continued the archive work, but it felt different now, more urgent. They were racing against time, trying to preserve every memory before they too became ghosts. One day, a young CIA analyst was assigned to help them organize the materials. She was brilliant, dedicated, and reminded Evelyn painfully of herself 50 years ago. Why did you do it? The analyst asked during a break. Why sacrifice so much for so little recognition? Because someone had to, Evelyn replied. The world was balanced on a knife's edge. Nuclear weapons, biological warfare, state-sponsored terrorism, any of it could have ended civilization. We were the finger on the scales keeping things balanced. But the cost was worth it. Every life we saved, every war we prevented, every disaster we stopped, it was worth it. The analyst studied the photographs spread across the table, young faces frozen in time. Would you do it again? In a heartbeat, Maul, Miguel said without hesitation. Even knowing how it would end, how we'd be forgotten and discarded. We'd do it again. That's insane. That's duty, Kowalski corrected. That's service. That's love of country taken to its absolute limit. The archive grew to thousands of pages, hundreds of hours of recordings, maps, and photographs and documents that painted a picture of a shadow war that had saved the world multiple times over. Morrison arranged for it to be stored in multiple locations, ensuring it would survive even if one copy was destroyed. "This is your legacy," he told them. "Future generations of intelligence operatives will study what you did learn from your successes and failures. As long as they also learn from our sacrifices," Evelyn said. "As long as they remember that we were human beings, not just assets to be used and discarded." 6 months after the ceremony, Kowalski had a heart attack. He survived, but barely, and it was clear his time was limited. From his hospital bed, he made one last recording for the archive. Unit 7 was asked to be invisible. He said, his voice weak but clear. "We succeeded too well. We became so invisible that we disappeared even from ourselves. But we existed. We fought. We bled. We saved lives. And now finally someone knows. That's enough. That's more than we ever expected." He died 2 days later, surrounded by the family he'd built under his assumed name. They never knew who he really was, but they knew he was loved. That left only Evelyn and Miguel, the last of the phantoms. Winter came early to Washington that year, and Evelyn found herself standing at Arlington National Cemetery on a bitter December morning, watching as they interred Kowalski's ashes in a grave marked with his assumed name. The honor guard didn't know they were burying a hero. The 21-gun salute was for Stanley Kowalski, the hunting guide, not the operative who'd prevented a nuclear exchange in 1972. Miguel stood beside her, both of them in black coats that couldn't quite keep out the cold that had nothing to do with weather. They were the only ones left now, the last witnesses to operations that had saved millions of lives. "We should have pushed harder for a proper burial," Miguel said as the crowd dispersed. "His family wanted him buried as the man they knew. We have to respect that. But he was more than that. We were all more than that. And less. That was the point." They walked slowly through the cemetery, past rows of white headstones marking soldiers who died with their names intact, their service acknowledged. Finally, Miguel stopped at an unmarked patch of grass. "Martinez is here somewhere," he said. "Thomas told me they found his body and buried him here in 2003, but there's no marker." "There should be," Evelyn said. "Even if it can't say who he really was, there should be something." That afternoon, they met with Morrison at his office. He looked tired, older than when they'd first met months ago. The fight for recognition had taken its toll on him too. "There's news," he said without preamble. "Congress is conducting a classified review of Cold War intelligence operations. They want testimony about Unit 7. "Absolutely not," Evelyn said immediately. "Politicians can't keep secrets. It'll leak within days. It's a closed session, only members with the highest clearance. They want to understand what was done in America's name to ensure proper oversight going forward." "Oversight?" Miguel laughed bitterly. "Where was oversight when we were being erased? When Martinez died homeless? When Thompson killed himself?" "That's exactly why they want to hear from you," Morrison insisted. "To make sure it never happens again. To establish protocols for protecting operators even after their service ends." Evelyn looked at the photographs on Morrison's wall, his family, his career highlights his public life. Things none of Unit 7 ever got to have. "One condition," she said. "We testify together, Miguel and I. We're all that's left, and when we're gone, Unit 7 dies with us. They get one chance to hear our story. I'll arrange it. The hearing was scheduled for January in a bunker beneath the Capitol that most members of Congress didn't even know existed. While they waited, Evelyn and Miguel continued adding to the archive, but also began something else, visiting the graves and families of their fallen comrades. They drove to Chicago first, to the Potter's Field, where Martinez had been buried. The cemetery administrator, a kind woman named Patricia, helped them locate the plot. "No one's visited this grave since the burial," she said. "County paid for it. Just a number on the stone." "He had a name," Miguel said quietly. "Roberto Martinez. He spoke 7 languages and saved hundreds of lives." "I'm sorry. Would you like me to update the records?" "No," Evelyn said. "The dead keep their secrets. But thank you." They left flowers birds of paradise because Martinez had loved exotic things and stood in the cold wind remembering the man who'd made them laugh during the darkest operations. Next was Ohio, where Thompson's widow still lived. She was in her 80s now, frail but sharp. When they introduced themselves as friends from her husband's military service, her eyes narrowed. "He didn't have military friends," she said. "He said that part of his life was sealed away." "We were in a special unit together," Miguel explained carefully. "We couldn't stay in touch, but we wanted you to know that your husband was a hero." "A hero." She laughed, but it was sad. "Heroes don't wake up screaming. Heroes don't drink themselves to sleep. Heroes don't leave notes apologizing for things they can't name." "Mrs. Thompson," Evelyn said gently, "your husband carried burdens that would have broken most people. He carried them to protect others, including you. That makes him a hero even if the cost was terrible." The widow studied them for a long moment. "You're like him, aren't you? That same look in your eyes, like you're seeing ghosts everywhere." "We are ghosts," Miguel admitted, "but we're trying to make peace with it." They left her with a photo they'd found in the archives, Thompson receiving a commendation that didn't officially exist, looking young and proud and unbroken. She held it like it was made of gold. The journey continued through a dozen states, finding graves, tracking down families, leaving small pieces of truth wherever they could, without violating their oaths. In Seattle, David Chen met them at his father's grave. "I've been reading his journals," David said. "The parts I can decode. He writes about you both constantly. You were his family more than we ever were." "That's not true," Evelyn protested. "Isn't it he couldn't tell us who he was, couldn't share what defined him? But with you, he could be himself. That's family." They stood in the Seattle rain, 3 people connected by a ghost, and David asked the question Evelyn had been dreading. "What was he like when he was himself?" "Brilliant," Miguel said immediately. "Funny. Brave to the point of stupidity sometimes. He once talked his way out of a Soviet detention center by convincing them he was a Chinese agricultural inspector," Evelyn added. "Spent 3 hours lecturing them on rice cultivation while I set up an extraction." "He loved puzzles," Miguel continued. "Said life was just a series of problems to solve. He would have been a great teacher if he'd had the chance." David was crying now. "Thank you for remembering him, for making sure he's not forgotten." As they drove away from Seattle, heading back to Washington for the congressional testimony, Miguel said, "We're doing the right thing, finally." "Are we? Or are we just old and tired of carrying secrets? Maybe both. Does it matter?" Evelyn thought about it as the miles rolled by. "No, I suppose it doesn't." The congressional hearing was unlike anything they'd experienced. 9 senators and representatives, all with clearances that went beyond top secret, sat in a windowless room that felt more like a tomb than a hearing chamber. The committee chair, Senator Patricia Hayes, was a former military intelligence officer herself. "Ms. Carter, Mr. Rodriguez," she began. "You're here voluntarily to provide testimony about a unit that, according to official records, never existed." "Why? Because we did exist," Evelyn answered. "For 12 years, Unit 7 conducted operations that prevented wars, saved lives, and protected American interests in ways that conventional forces couldn't. We were erased from history, but history happened because of us." "Tell us about the selection process," Hayes said. "How does one become a ghost?" Miguel took this one. "You don't become a ghost. You discover you always were one." They looked for people with no strong family ties, no connections that couldn't be cut. Orphans were preferred. People who could disappear without anyone asking questions. "And the training? 18 months of hell," Evelyn said. "Physical conditioning that broke most candidates. Language immersion until you dreamed in foreign tongues. Psychological conditioning that stripped away everything you were and rebuilt you as a weapon that could think." The mortality rate, 40% didn't survive training. Another 30% washed out within the first year of operations. By the time the unit was disbanded, there were only 37 operators who'd completed more than 5 years of service. And of those 37, 2, Miguel said simply, were all that's left. The committee members exchanged glances. One of them, Representative James Curtis, leaned forward. "The records we've been able to access suggest Unit 7 prevented at least 3 nuclear exchanges. Can you confirm this?" 5, Evelyn corrected. 1969 in Pakistan, when a rogue general tried to launch Indian-acquired Soviet missiles. 1971 in East Germany, when a computer error nearly triggered NATO's nuclear response. 1973 in the Middle East during the Yom Kippur War. 1974 in China during a military coup attempt, and 1975 in North Korea when Kim Il-sung's son tried to prove himself by attacking American forces in the DMZ with tactical nuclear weapons. 5 times the world nearly ended, Hayes said quietly, and no one knew. "That was the point," Miguel said. "If people knew how close we came, how often we came that close, there would have been panic. Better to handle it quietly and let people sleep peacefully." "Tell us about the disbandment," Curtis pressed. "Why was Unit 7 terminated?" Evelyn and Miguel exchanged glances. This was the dangerous territory, the part that could still get people killed. "The Church Committee hearings," Evelyn said carefully. "Congressional oversight of intelligence operations. Unit 7 was too independent, too deniable. There were concerns about accountability." "That's the official reason," Hayes said. "What's the real reason?" "We knew too much," Miguel said bluntly. "We'd operated in spaces between laws, done things that were necessary but not legal. Some people in power thought we were liabilities. So they tried to eliminate you. Some of us. Others were just cut loose with new identities and warnings to never speak of what we'd done. And you accepted this. What choice did we have?" Evelyn's voice was bitter. "Fight our own government, expose operations that would have caused international incidents. We did what we always did. We disappeared." The hearing went on for 6 hours. They covered operations, techniques, the human cost of being erased. At one point, Hayes asked about the psychological impact. "Imagine being told that everything you've done, everything you've sacrificed, never happened," Evelyn said. "That the friends who died beside you were never there. That the missions that defined your life were just dreams. Now imagine living with that for 50 years. "The suicide rate among Unit 7 veterans?" Curtis asked. 60%, Miguel answered. "That we know of. Could be higher." "Why didn't you kill yourselves?" The blunt question hung in the air. Finally, Evelyn answered. Stubbornness, spite, the knowledge that if we died, no one would ever know the truth. We survived out of duty to the dead. And now we're tired, we're old, and we want Unit 7 to be more than a ghost story whispered in intelligence circles. When the hearing ended, Hayes approached them privately. What you've told us today will reshape how we handle covert operators going forward. No one should be erased the way you were. Respectfully, Senator, you can't promise that, Evelyn said. There will always be operations too sensitive to acknowledge, operators too dangerous to exist officially. The best you can do is ensure they're not abandoned afterward. Then that's what we'll do. As they left the Capitol, Miguel turned to Evelyn. Think it'll make a difference? For us, no. For the next generation of ghosts, maybe. They walked through the bitter January wind, two old soldiers who'd finally told their story to people with the power to do something about it. Whether they would was another question entirely. That evening, Morrison called with unexpected news. The president wants to meet with you again, privately, tomorrow. Why? He's considering something unprecedented. He wants your input. They met the president in the Oval Office, this time just the three of them and Morrison. The president looked troubled, holding a file that Evelyn recognized as one from the Unit 7 archives. I've been reading your operations reports, he said. The things you did, the lives you saved. It's humbling. We did our duty, Miguel said. You did more than that, which is why I'm considering something that goes against every protocol we have. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I want to publicly acknowledge Unit 7. The silence was absolute. Finally, Evelyn spoke. That's impossible. The operations are too sensitive even after 50 years. Not the operations, the unit. A simple acknowledgement that America employed a special operations unit during the Cold War that prevented multiple global catastrophes. No details, no names unless you agree, just acknowledgement. Why? Miguel asked. Because we're losing the intelligence war. Not overseas, but here. Public trust in intelligence agencies is at an all-time low. People think we're either incompetent or malevolent. Acknowledging Unit 7 showing that intelligence work has saved millions of lives might help restore some faith. You want to use us for propaganda, Evelyn said flatly. I want to use your truth for education, the president corrected. There's a difference. The foreign intelligence services who remember us won't appreciate the exposure, Miguel warned. There could be retaliation. We've reached out through back channels. The Russians, Chinese, even the Iranians. They all have stories about Unit 7, ghost stories that have become legends in their intelligence communities. They're not opposed to limited acknowledgement as long as operational details remain classified. Evelyn stood walking to the window that looked out on the rose garden. Somewhere out there in unmarked graves and forgotten corners lay the bodies of Unit 7 operators who'd died thinking they'd been erased from history. What would this acknowledgement look like? She asked. A presidential statement acknowledging the existence of Unit 7 from 1963 to 1975. A mention that this unit prevented multiple global catastrophes through classified operations. Recognition that the operators sacrificed not just their lives, but their very existence for their country. And if you're willing, a public ceremony honoring the unit as a whole. Our names. Only if you consent. You can remain anonymous if you prefer. Miguel joined Evelyn at the window. What do you think, Phoenix? She thought about all the ghosts, all the sacrifices, all the years of silence. I think we're too old to care about our covers anymore. But this decision isn't just about us. It's about the families who never knew the children who grew up thinking their parents were traveling salesmen or insurance adjusters. We'll reach out to all of them, Morrison promised. Give them the choice. Then I want one more condition, Evelyn said, turning back to the president. A memorial. A real one, not just a star on a wall. Something that says Unit 7 existed, that these people mattered. Where? Arlington, near the tomb of the unknown soldier. We were unknown soldiers too, just in a different war. The president nodded. I'll make it happen. As they left the White House, Miguel said, We're really doing this, stepping out of the shadows after all this time. Not stepping out, Evelyn corrected. Being pulled out. There's a difference. Is there? She thought about it as they walked. Maybe not. Maybe it's time to stop being ghosts. The announcement came on a Tuesday in February. The president held a special press conference with Evelyn and Miguel standing behind him, their faces revealing nothing, as he spoke words that shattered 50 years of silence. Today, I am acknowledging the existence of a classified special operations unit that served our nation from 1963 to 1975. Known as Unit 7, this group of extraordinary Americans operated in the shadows of the Cold War, preventing catastrophes that would have cost millions of lives. They sacrificed not just their safety, but their very existence, agreeing to be erased from history in service to their country. The press room erupted with questions, but the president held up his hand. Operational details remain classified and will remain so. But these heroes deserve recognition, even if limited. Behind me stand the only two surviving members of Unit 7 who have chosen to be identified. Evelyn Carter and Miguel Rodriguez represent the finest tradition of American service, selfless, dedicated, and until today, invisible. The questions came like bullets. What kind of operations? How many members were there? Why reveal this now? Morrison stepped forward to field the questions with prepared non-answers, but one reporter's question stopped everyone cold. Ms. Carter, was it worth it, the sacrifice? Evelyn stepped to the microphone, feeling the weight of every ghost standing with her. 23 members of Unit 7 died in service. 14 more died in the years after disbandment, many by their own hands, unable to bear the weight of their secrets. Each of them prevented wars, saved lives, protected America in ways you'll never fully know. Was it worth it? Ask the millions of people who are alive today because of what we did. Ask the children who grew up in peace instead of nuclear winter. Don't ask me. I'm just a ghost who finally gets to say she existed. The impact was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, foreign intelligence services were confirming Unit 7's existence in carefully worded statements. The Russian FSB called them worthy adversaries who helped prevent global catastrophe. The Chinese Ministry of State Security acknowledged professional operations that maintained Cold War stability. But more importantly, families started coming forward. Children and grandchildren of Unit 7 operators who'd finally understood why their parents had been so distant, so troubled, so mysterious. Sarah Walsh, daughter of an operator who died in 1982, called Evelyn directly. My father left a letter to be opened after his death. It just said, Unit 7, I mattered. We never knew what it meant until today. The memorial was dedicated on Memorial Day. A simple black granite wall with 37 stars, each representing a member of Unit 7. No names, those remained classified, but a simple inscription. To those who sacrificed existence itself in service to humanity. Unit 7, 1963 to 1975. From shadows into light. Evelyn and Miguel stood at the dedication wearing their Medal of Freedom openly for the first time. The president spoke, generals saluted, and a honor guard played taps. But what mattered most were the families who'd come finally understanding that their loved ones hadn't been forgotten after all. As the ceremony ended, a young girl, maybe 10 years old, approached Evelyn. She was holding the hand of a woman Evelyn recognized as Thompson's granddaughter. "My mom says you knew my grandpa," the girl said. "I did." "Was he really a hero?" Evelyn knelt down her knees, protesting, and looked the girl in the eyes. "Your grandfather saved the world at least twice. He was one of the bravest men I ever knew." "Then why was he so sad?" "Because heroes carry heavy burdens, but he carried them so you wouldn't have to." The girl considered this, then handed Evelyn a small bouquet of flowers. "For the ghosts," she said solemnly. As the crowd dispersed, Miguel and Evelyn remained at the memorial, looking at the 37 stars. "Think they know?" Miguel asked. "Wherever they are, think they know they've finally been acknowledged?" "They know," Evelyn said with certainty. "Ghosts always know." They stood there as the sun set over Arlington, two old soldiers who'd finally stepped out of the shadows. Tomorrow would bring more interviews, more documentation, more attempts to capture history that had been deliberately erased. But tonight, for the first time in 50 years, they weren't ghosts. They were Unit 7. They had existed. They had mattered. And finally, someone knew.